UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasion, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Crossfire.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of UAP Crossfire. And UAP Crossfire is only one place, and that's KGRA DB, here each Thursday night beginning at 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 on the East Coast. And as, well, not so much recently, but as usual, we are joined by our panel, sharp bunch, each and every one. Chris DePerno, who, by the way, is the MUFON State Director. Padre Dan, who lives all the way up in the North Country, and he had to dig his way out, make himself a generator out of a snowbank, and he joins us too. And, of course, Commander Cobra, our retired military pilot and all-around good guy. He's been missing in action the last couple of weeks, but we've been looking forward to him coming back and joining us, especially for tonight's show, because last week we examined the News Nation expose video of purportedly recovery of an ET object. And we saw the video, and everybody here agreed that if anybody had to comment on that, it would be Commander Cobra. And ergo, he's here tonight, and that's what we're going to do. And then later on in the show, and I want to dedicate this to our previous panelist, who's no longer with us, because he had some very strong feelings about our new president that just came into office. But that president, Donald J. Trump's son, recently had an extensive conversation with Ross Coulthart from News Nation about this very thing, UAP Crossfire, UAP UFOs. And what might, if anything, Donald Trump, how would he come down on this? Now, we've seen some amazing things the last couple of days, including today. President Trump signed an executive order throwing open the files on the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, his brother, who was the former Attorney General Robert Kennedy, and Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But with that starting, do any of you gentlemen have anything you want to start off with, Chris?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant move by the president, and I'll tell you the reason why. He's talked about releasing those documents, and if the documents show what people think is that a certain element of our government was involved, it'll be much easier for him to break up that part of the government or splinter it, just like John F. Kennedy was going to do with the CIA. So if, let's say, the CIA comes up and is part of that documents that they had a part into JFK's assassination, well, people are going to say, well, what are you going to do about it? I mean, logically, are you going to do something about it? Well, you can say, yeah, the people want this done, so I can revise the Central Intelligence Agency or the FBI. So it makes it a lot easier for him to, chop away at some of these things that need to be brought back in. They need to be reeled back in. And this is great ammunition. That's just a thought.
Padre?
Well, I also saw the interview between Don Jr. and Ross Coulthart, and to have somebody that close to the White House who's legitimately interested in the subject, I think is an advantage. There's one thing that we can say about our new president is that he is very sensitive to the voice of the public, and people have been clamoring for the files on the assassinations that you mentioned. And as he signed it, he mentioned that. He said people have been wanting this for years. And I think we have an opportunity here, if those who, like all of us here, are interested in having something disclosed about UAP, if we make our voices loud enough and heard, he is inclined to give us a listen and perhaps act on that. So I'm encouraged. Look forward to what's going to happen.
Commander.
Well, gentlemen, it's wonderful to see you again. Thank you for the warm return and welcome. Before we jump in, I do want to recognize someone that contacted me on the email line, Brett from Naples, Florida. I'm pretty sure he's not in the snow belt. They're not skiing in Naples tonight. They are in my old hometown of Pensacola, Florida, where my son lives. And they have 8 inches of snow from the other night down there, which equals the amount of snow I had here up in the northeast territories of Maine. So Brett, incredible contact. I was very interested in what you passed to you about your father's experience, and hope that we can talk some more. He's one of those he said he got our feed and a random connection, and he really liked the show and went through it. And I appreciate that he took the time to reach out to us. With that said, first administration of President Trump 45, I said, and was castigated by a number of people, that if we were going to get disclosure from the executive of our federal government, it was probably the best chance was going to happen under Trump. And and I think that now it's even a higher degree if that possibility comes up. The release of these documents or these files will be critical to establishing just how far off the mark we have drifted, in my opinion, as a nation's people, and having any kind of accountability what's going on. And it's going to probably be somewhat upsetting to some of the details that's going to be there. It will be disappointing in what it lacks in details, I am sure. And it'll be very interesting to see the fight that is going to occur by the forces that do not want these files released and will fight President Trump on the release. With that said, President Trump has expressed in the past that he's not a believer in this. He just does not seem to think that there's anything behind it. When he was on record making those remarks, he had also inferred that his conversations with the military, other key officials that he was dealing with, is where he kind of made that conclusion. Now, I've watched this very, very closely. There have been a number of people over the years in high positions in government that have had experiences that have talked about it. Jimmy Carter famously talked about at a Democratic operation that he was at as he was making, I think, his run for governor, that he saw something fly over when they came out from a convention, large convention meeting that they were at, and they never went anyplace. President Trump obviously has survived a life-altering event. I think that has changed his perspective, and I also think he's a lot wiser to what went down from the first term to where he is now. All that being said, he has made the promise that he was going to release these files, and that promise has been kept, at least the initial part of it. As I said, I think it's a very important development. I think it's going to mean, if there's an opportunity to have any of the curtain pulled back, it will probably happen in this administration, or probably the best chance that we will see that. So that's my feeling. I am extremely interested, but I'm going to be honest with you, gentlemen, as I always have been in the past. We still don't have a clear story what happened to President Lincoln. And there seems to be a pretty good conspiracy behind his assassination. And I know the files probably were not as well kept. But there's an incredible story behind the assassination and the various attempts to kill President Lincoln and what went on. I urge folks to read Brad Metlich's book, who talks about how he hid himself as an invalided patient with a nurse on the back of a train to come into Washington, D.C. Early on because of threats against him. Not far from where I live, Montreal, Confederates from the Civil War gathered in Montreal to try to insert people through the Vermont and Maine. Well, then in those days it was Massachusetts. I take that back. People in Maine will be all over me. 1820 is when we became a state. So Maine, Vermont, there was entry points. They attempted to bring agents for assassination through an organization that was established in Montreal, Canada. Come down in
one quick question, Commander.
Sure.
Confederates, is that another way of saying Democrats?
Well, that's not, I think, a completely fair comparison. I was referring to the southern states during the Civil War and the Confederacy that they had established.
Democrats, one and all.
Yes, I think that's a somewhat harsh but accurate description. And the great state that I live in now was one of the first states that was a part of the abolition movement. And obviously that's what the Republican Party was formed around, was an abolition movement. So I am very excited to see what comes of this process. I think that we may have a shakeup at the federal level, well overdue in my opinion. But I think this is all good progress, and I am excited to see where it goes. But
well,
to me, you know how I look at these things.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
I said, you know how I look at these things. I don't always think that things are as obvious as they are. And I have my conclusions on all of what these are based on things over the years that I've read, heard about, seen, heard different theories. The only theory that was never proven is that JFK committed suicide. I mean, that's about the only theory that has not been put up there as a plausible way of what happened. I look at the comparison of, that was a joke, Padre. You'll have to listen to the show and replay to understand my satire there. I see the confusion on his face, and it's like hitting an angel, and it just kills me when I do that to him. I look at the
I've heard angels can take care of themselves.
Yep, generally they can.
Yeah.
And I think the Padre can as well. It's just that he has that hurt puppy look sometimes, and it just breaks my heart, especially when I'm the responsible party. You look at what happened in Pennsylvania on the assassination attempt, and millimeters away from that being successful, and how the post investigation went, and how quickly things were tied up, destroyed, answered without a complete investigation, and move on.
The body was cremated. Oh yeah, nobody's answered why.
Right, and I've never heard a comparison to ballistics, how all those bullets were fired. I mean, there's just too many things there that were just left, and it's to me has a very grassy knoll kind of feel to it. There's just a lot of things that went on that are very similar. When I look at Martin Luther King and I look at what happened to Robert Kennedy, and how there is a very interesting programming of the person that was apprehended in both cases, when you see what happened with President Trump, and in their cases, the programming of individuals that are blamed or fixed responsibility for it. And again, we go right into a lone gunman situation. It seems to repeat. And
you want to hear a shocker?
Sure.
Okay. And when I first found this out, I got to tell you, I was totally astounded. But my beloved wife's uncle, her dad's brother, was a gentleman by the name of Baxter. I'm sorry, Grant Cooper. Baxter was her dad's name. I never met the man. He passed on years before Vicky and I ever got together. But his name was Grant Cooper. And Grant Cooper was one of the leading mafia gangster lawyers in Los Angeles. Okay. As a matter of fact, the story Vicky told me that she got from one of her cousins was that after he successfully defended, and I forget the guy's name. If I said same, you'd probably recognize it. But this guy turned around and bought him a brand new Cadillac when the trial was over. He ended up being the defense attorney for Sirhan Sirhan, purportedly the assassin that murdered Robert F. Kennedy. Now, I've got I've got a graphic of a Look magazine cover that had Grant Cooper and Sirhan Sirhan on the front cover. So, I love to throw that out whenever I get involved in a conversation about assassinations, assassins, etc. So that gives me what? 1, 2, 3. 3 degrees of separation from Sirhan Sirhan. For whatever that's worth. Okay.
I'm looking at you in a slightly different light, Mr. Decker.
About 2 days ago, I was having a conversation with a very close, dear friend of mine, and we were talking about this incident that News Nation aired last Saturday. And I told him, I said, before this happened, the hoopla that was being thrown up around this was unbelievable, coming in from all ends, all right, about what a great reveal this was going to be. This was going to be a ground shaker, okay? An earthquake of monumental proportions. And I was telling my friend, I said, God, when I stop and I think about it, I've been involved in this beat closing on quickly to almost 40 years that I've been beating this path about UFOs, UAPs, ETs, paranormal creatures, cryptozoology, you name it. And I said, I got to tell you, one of the very first groundbreaking revelations made to me was none other than by John Lear, way back at the tail end of the 1980s. And it was in light of his paper that he had written that today is known almost collectively as the John Lear hypothesis. And I'm sure you can find that yet today online if you go in and do a search, John Lear, John Lear's paper, John Lear's hypothesis. And he told me then that between 3 and 5 years, this will become public knowledge because of these devices that the ETs are inserting into the bodies of abductees, and that the aliens and the U.S. government had entered into a secret treaty that in an exchange for allowing the aliens to abduct human beings, conduct their research with cattle mutilations, and etc. Okay. This is all going to become publicly known. And this secret treaty is unconstitutional. And within that 3 to 5 year period, all of these people that have been implanted, and back in those days, a lot of people were claiming they were implanted through the nose, etc. Yep. Okay. The aliens will activate those abductees. In other words, they'll throw a switch and then do their bidding. Well, this is what Lear told me. Well, of course, 3 to 5 years passed fairly quickly. And I asked John about that later. Now, in the interim, from about 88, 89 until 93, 94, maybe, John went over the cliff, traveling about 125 miles an hour. And suddenly, the stuff that he was saying previously got even more bizarre. For example, there are millions of people living on the moon. The moon has areas where there are freestanding bodies of water, trees, etc., and that there are literally millions of beings living throughout our solar system. And I had John, as a matter of fact, the very last time, before he passed away, I asked him about that. And I said, John, what's your proof? I just know it. Okay. Well, how do you prove that? I mean, come on. Don't you recognize how crazy that sounds? I don't care. You can believe me or not. Okay. Well, that's fair. You know, that's fair. But my point is, I've been hearing that kind of stuff forever. So when this News Nation thing came out about what supposedly was going to be revealed, I accepted it very cautiously. Now, I don't know about you gentlemen, but before we get into the nitty gritty, let me go to Chris first. And Chris, when you heard all this hoopla, what was your take on it?
I believed everything he said. It was the most amazing thing.
So the Bastard Award has already been awarded early this evening. There'll be no more contestants for the Bastard Award of the UAP.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to see Don's face because we talked about it before. He goes, what the hell is he talking about now? No, it's a nothing burger, just like everything.
Chris, the next time you do something like that, wait till he has the drink in his mouth. So that
I will. I want to see the water come spraying out.
If you made it come out his nose, I would have been happy too.
Yeah, for that one, man, we would have had a great time. But the thing with News Nation is a nothing burger, just like everything I've seen so far. They build up these congressional hearings, and I've said this 100 times. The people they get in there talking about it got great titles, but they're either dumber than hell or they're lying their ass off. Because, I mean, when the chief of intelligence for the United States Navy gets up there and says, geez, we don't have any computers that can show a great picture of this. I'm like, you got stuff up in space that can see license plates. You got all kinds of different photography equipment that can show everything. And you say that thing above you, that's the best picture we got of that triangle. And that's a drone. Nothing to worry about. Well, first of all, and I'm going back a little bit just to proceed with this. If a United States naval warship can allow a drone to go over and they don't know what it is, we got some serious problems on our hands. That's number one. Number two is that if that's the best computer that Congress can get, I'd like to know where the money's going. That's two. And the third thing with the Ross Coulthart thing, I looked at the video. I listened to this guy. First of all, man, somebody better take a drug test on this guy. Did you see his eyes? His eyes were like popping out. I was like, holy crap, this guy. I mean, there's something there. But I just thought that video was too short. And I got to answer this, Commander, because Don and I were talking about it. How the hell is he taking a video while trying to fly a hot helicopter?
He's not the person that video came from.
Okay.
He's not flying it. One or the other.
Because I was saying that, Don, I think you got to use two hands to fly a helicopter, right?
You do, in general, especially in that kind of hovering position. Absolutely.
Right. So I'm saying to myself, there's no way he's taking that video. Right. No. And you agree.
Yeah. So there's a couple ways that the first thing we can jump in on. since we're just talking about the video. When I got a couple phone calls, I got a couple texts, and I kind of took your stance. If it was that breaking, I would be seeing it on the streaming services that I use. So I knew that there was something packaged there. Everyone that's listened to me, and you gentlemen have heard me say this before, I'm always suspect when the buildup of this is coming out, because I just believe that we're being crowdsourced all the time to see how information's moving. And again, going back to the first part of the show, and I love or hate the president. That's not the part that I want to zero in on. But you have competing forces that are within our government, within our nation right now. And there are people, and I think the intel community has been somewhat compromised over some of the activities over the last maybe 10 to 15 years, especially, that they are looking for patterns that are occurring on our media, our social media networks as we're moving. We've all said, and jokingly, but seriously, that, if you're on KGRA, you probably have a file started, and people are, tracking what's going on. And it's interesting to people that are in that business to see how things move around. Mm-hmm. So that's one. The other part is talking about the physical part of it. When I looked at that, it's a very, very short clip. So it allows you to look at it a lot, and there's things that are very, very interesting about it. So the first part is it could be CGI. It could be completely a CGI kind of representation that's going on there from the quality that I saw there. I put that as a very low probability. You asked about the view. One or two ways that's going. With the stability, again, short period of time, it could be a GoPro type camera or recording device that's on the helmet of the person who is working that hoist.
Okay.
Or that, I should say, that sling. That's the more proper term to use. So the other part is, in many helicopters, especially in the hoist that would be used for raising and lowering personnel, there's a camera up there. Our Coast Guard uses them now. Why? Because for debriefing a rescue is a big part of the reason you do that, so that you can see what's happening. We're putting these cameras on more and more aircraft so that you can have a record of what you have done. You record what is seen in a fighter aircraft or even a transport or bomber aircraft, what goes to the HUD. It helps for mission analysis to see how the flight crew behave. In the case of the Coast Guard, aside from the fact of just being able to have it for mission analysis, you also get good clips that you can put into the press. And then you can show the rescue of people out of boat at sea or taking somebody off a rooftop. That's good 10, 15 seconds of video that shows people being saved, being put in the basket, being brought up into the Coast Guard helicopter and saved. And that's publicity. That kind of good publicity is important for getting the message out there for continued support. I mean, that's not mercenary in any way. That's just standard way that we operate. So that's probably what it is. Let's talk about that particular position. It appears to me to be a very light object, whatever that is at the end of it. It has mass, but it doesn't seem to have a lot of density on it. Just the way it behaves, it moves around. The sling, that vertical cable that's down, that appears to be attached to some kind of, a lot of people refer to as a cradle, or the sling rig that's on it, and the weight, that seems to be attached to whatever that egg is. The mat kind of thing that's on there, and had four very light lines that I could make out. They could be cables, but that would be really heavy weight. So that means it'd be a really big helicopter, and I don't see any downwash affecting it. And there's a whole bunch of things to go on.
I was going to ask you that about the downwash.
So, and I as we were getting ready on the pre-up in the show, I mean, I've seen some people put some reasons out why they don't think the downwash is there, and some of it makes sense, and some doesn't. I'll just give you analysis. So it's either that is looking down through the belly of the aircraft, where there's usually, that's where the sling hoist attachment is. You usually open up a hatch in the floor of the aircraft, you fold it back, you lock it down, you lower the line the sling line that you're going to attach the load to, and then you're able to pick the load up. In that case, you're looking inside the aircraft, looking down. This particular picture doesn't have that aspect to me. It looks like you're looking further above it, and that sling is off a little bit from the center position. It gives me the impression that they may have used a hoist, and I have done that. If you have a light enough load, the average hoist out there on most helicopters is probably ultimately rated to 1,000 pounds. Usually you would put 2 people on board. And the reason you have such a high weight on it and you don't go to that full weight is so if you put any kind of G force on it, you approach anything more than a G, then you have to multiply the weight. So that's why you would usually have like 1,000 pound kind of limit. And most hoist motors can't lift much higher than that without working too high. So it can be, that's the safety factor. Go ahead,
So
Chris.
I have a question for you, sir. This is a top secret project, correct?
I have no idea if it is or it isn't.
Well, let's just, for the sake of argument, let's just say this is a craft that they from an unknown world, and it lands there, and they're going to hoist it and bring it someplace. Wouldn't they crate it or cover it with something? I mean,
so let me give you why I would think this happens. There's a couple things missing in this picture. And
yeah, a lot of things.
You strike upon it very quickly, Tim. What you strike upon is, if this is valuable cargo, it doesn't seem to have a really, it doesn't have what I would consider the normal things. So
Right.
What I'm getting at, if it's valuable cargo, where are the people on the ground, if this is the start of the operation, that are guiding it? Many times on these kinds of things, you put what they call taglines, where you see people, much like a Macy's Day balloon, you have taglines to help stabilize the load underneath that sling so that it isn't wobbling around. And then when you're dropping it off, you would have something prepared, some kind of preparation, and I would think people in attendance. So if that is the case, obviously this clip does not show that. What it could be pretty easily is they had an emergency or they were trying to get control of it, and they just did a quick set down, and that can happen with a load. Sometimes they can start to spin. You start to move. I explained to someone that was asking me for my opinion on this years back. Remember the F-111, the fighter bomber?
Mm-hmm.
When it was originally designed, it doesn't have an ejection seat. What it was supposed to do, believe it or not, was there was a capability for the capsule when it left the airplane with the pilot and the bomb navigator in it to actually fly as a glider in a lifting body. They even originally designed it to have winglets that they never went forward with, but they tested it in drops, and the thing could create some lift. So the idea was that you would glide away from where you were at, and then when you got closer to the ground, the parachute would come out and the capsule would lower itself down. And it was watertight, and they did not have an ejection seat. When we picked those up, we had to be specially trained, because the first couple of times they picked them up and started to fly out, i.e. one of the places was Vietnam, where they had one go down, and they needed to recover it. They got the crew out, but they had to go back and get the capsule because they had left classified documents inside the capsule. So when they went in there and it's in a hostile area, they pick it up, and you do what you normally do. You fly out as fast as you can. You let that thing trail behind. Well, guess what? When I got above 60 knots, this capsule started to produce enough lift that it got slack on the line and got caught up in the downdraft of lift coming off the rotor blades and started to fly a loose formation, and they weren't in control of it. And I can tell you that it's very scary when something like that's happening, because you have no control. Usually a truck or a heavy load is hanging down, and you feel it, and you'll feel it swing back and forth, and they teach you things to do to get it under control. So, of course, they see this thing starting to get slack on the line because it's making lift. It's coming up towards the rotor blades, and they cut it away. And in this particular case for this mission, when it hit the ground, they brought an airstrike in, and they blew it up with an airstrike, and they decided not to try to pick it up again. That's how that happy story ended. My point is, they may have had something happen, if this is the event that that they needed to set it down. And that may account for why you have that very small clip, that somebody could nail that clip, keep a recording of it, sneak it out, make it happen, because it shows them trying to get it back under control, or they had to put it down as an emergency. So that's the only explanation I can give you what I see there. I don't see a lot of downwash showing up. So it's either a very, very light helicopter that's doing that, or it's in a very high hover, or it's a combination of both.
Well, I look closely at that. That's one thing I look for, the downwash.
And I
saw
noticed that
nothing.
the sound didn't sound right to me. The sound seems to be kind of a canned kind of soundtrack for that rotor. Now, so I was asked, do you think this is one of the quiet helicopters? You know, we have the Ghost Hawk, which is the one that they used in bin Laden's raid. It is a very quiet helicopter. I have not seen it in person. I'd love to. I have not. But I have studied quite a bit about it. It's supposed to be very, very quiet. It also has a lot of shaping on it to give it stealth characteristics so that it doesn't show up on radar very easily. One of the reasons that we lost one on the bin Laden raid is because when you do things like that to it, the aircraft does not have a lot of margin of excess power. So in the case of bin Laden, when the helicopter was waiting and the first one went in, they got caught in a downwash because the altitude was quite high. It was about 6,000 feet above sea level. And helicopters have a hard time hovering. The higher you get up, the air's thinner, and you're demanding more out of the air. They got caught in a downwash, and they got into something called power settling, and that's what caused them to have that crash. They lost control. So the margin on there, that could be happening here. If you're using a very exclusive, very stealthy aircraft, there's some trade-offs to the power capability. So if that was the case, and this is what's happening, that might account for why it's very low downwash and why the sound is somewhat muffled. To me, it sounds like the soundtrack has been altered.
Hey, Don, here's a question for you. Did you look at that video? And let me ask you, did that thing look like it was a crash? They said it was a crash retrieval. It looked pretty intact.
I saw no impact crater or anything like that. All right. It did not appear, from what I could see from the video, damaged in any way. All right.
Yeah.
So and a day or two after this thing was aired, all right, some enterprising young man went out, got himself an egg, got himself a shag green carpet, okay, and hooked a cable to the egg that was a tape measure. All right. And except for the tape measure, you'd almost swear, good God, that's the same thing I just saw the night before.
No.
So, and by the way, I've got a copy of that if you guys want to see it.
I just think that this thing is turned into such a nothing burger. And then Padre, maybe you could explain this one. I can't. I mean, he started talking about how this wonderful feeling flushed over him and how this became such a spiritual event and how he was mind melting with this egg. I mean, I might mind melt with a cheese omelet, but I don't mind melt with an egg.
A feminine essence is how he described it.
Oh boy.
Okay, I'm not going to touch that one because I'll say something to get us thrown off the station. So I don't know. I mean, the guy started talking like it was really strange. You know what I mean? He didn't talk like, oh yeah, we did this, we did this. He just kept going on and on about this spiritual experience he had with the craft.
Well, I don't. If I was in the same situation, I can understand why he may profess those kinds of reactions. I'm not understanding that from the 10-second or so clip that we're studying on this and looking at. So I don't understand what that caused. I don't understand what his role was, if he was supposed to be the person that was, working that sling and was responsible, or if he was one of the pilots flying the aircraft. There's a lot there. Okay, so what do I think it is? I don't think it's extraterrestrial, only because when I looked at it, to me, the shape seemed to change. It had, for lack of a better term, weather balloon kind of appearance to it. And of course, those have been in the news. That's not
elasticity.
Yeah, it had something that it didn't look like it was more of a membrane and not a structure. And it did seem to change its appearance a little bit. And I noticed that the sling line never really slacks up. And I could see the lines that were connected to it. I counted 4 at one point that seemed to be around it as a stabilizing with that that wrap that seems to be attached to the one side of it. So its shape looked like it changed a little bit, but it didn't flatten out what I could see. Again, very, very short time to look at all that. So are we recovering something that is something, quote unquote, as simple as we're recovering another spy balloon? Well, we know our PRC friends are putting them up in the air left and right, and God knows what we're putting in there. I think we're probably doing more low orbit and satellite swarming these days than balloons, because they're more expensive than balloons. And expensive means good, right? I mean, that's why we're in a $31+ trillion debt, because more expensive is always better. And we have the Chinese that are working balloons, which goes back to their history, thousands of years of using balloons, and they're dropping hypersonic test assets from their balloons at high altitude. So pretty smart stuff in my book. Is that what we're looking at? Maybe. Again, it's just not a lot of time to look at to get it. I saw somebody in the comment box, and I agree with them. The terrain looks like it could be the Nevada or Arizona kind of terrain. That part of where it looks like it's been cleaned away could be post the helicopter has blown away all the surface sand, and the part that you're looking at, and it does have that kind of look, like it's been parched out by the initial downblast of air coming off the rotors. And then what's left is the stuff that won't easily move until you get very, very close to the ground. And that's partially a technique to avoid a brownout, that you don't want that stuff to come up and envelop you. The NVG portion of it, or the low light enhancement, kind of looks like a fairly common camera GoPro that has that light spectrum on it, but nothing really made it happen. I can understand someone saying having a spiritual kind of part to it, but again, without explaining more and not having somebody asking the questions, where you're just kind of showing this as showing, telling that, and not engaging, again, highly suspect to me.
Well, I can't tell you how disappointed I am, because when I heard this was coming on, because I followed Mr. Coulthart for quite some time, and generally speaking, I have high regard for him and his journalistic pursuits of the past, and I thought that that would lend some credibility here, but then it just turned into a Niagara Falls of cascading disappointment after disappointment as the show began to reveal itself. Bible says that the eyes are the window to the soul. And the gentleman there who was telling his story, he certainly has a career ahead of him as a spokesperson for Red Bull or some other energy drink, because, his eyes were so wide open. It looked like they were going to, go out and kill somebody when they popped out of his head. But then we saw the footage, and like you guys, it was underwhelming to me. I had a lot of the same questions I've already covered, the downwash, the kind of give or elasticity to the thing, slack in the line, and so forth. And then when he started to get into the talking about psionics and, the spiritual experience that he had, that's my arena. That's where my life's work is right now, is in ministry and the spiritual realm. And it just began to get more and more weird. And that, to me, just started to send up all kinds of red flags. Now, that said, I don't doubt his sincerity. I don't believe that he is aware. Let me put it this way. In his mind, all of this happened as he related to it. I think that he sincerely believes that. But there's something else going on in his mind and in his head. Now, being a believer in the ways that demonic forces can affect our minds, and perhaps there have been doors opened in his past to that, they will tend to reveal what people want to see. And so when we got into that experiment in the program where they're sitting out in lawn chairs and calling these things in, again, Scripture will tell us that these things, can manifest themselves in any shape or appearance that they want to. And no doubt that, they're able to do that.
Well, he referenced Stephen Greer.
Yeah,
Okay. And
Yeah.
when he did that, when he referenced Stephen Greer, and I've known Greer for 36, 37 years, thereabout, and I got to tell you, all his credibility went down the toilet for me.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
need to explain to everybody why, though, Don. We've talked about it before, but you need to cover that so people understand.
Well, there is an error about Greer that I detected immediately. Right after he decided to enter into the UFO field, he called Vicky and I up at UFO Magazine and introduced himself and said that he would like to go to lunch with us. Okay. Now, at that time, this would have been circa, oh golly, 90 or 91. We had just put our newest magazine to bed to be printed out and et cetera, you know, the magazine thing. And I had done an article in there in this brand new issue that dealt with human casualties that had come into contact with the UFO phenomenon. A number of people had been seriously injured. Several had died. I forget now what it was that caused me to research and do that article, but something had happened in the UFO field around then that I thought it was time to do this. So anyway, we meet Greer at this restaurant downtown in Los Angeles, and a very charming guy, very friendly. We sat down, we put in our order for lunch, got iced teas or something, and we were just sitting there chatting. And he began to proceed to try to convince us that the whole UFO topic was totally benign. They are here to help humanity reach the next level, okay? They are here for our benefit. Now, I'll be the first to admit that rubbed me the wrong way.
Well, they're doing a piss poor job. I can tell you that.
Yeah. And I threw at him because at that time, the abduction phenomenon was beginning to be the tail that wagged the dog, okay? Bud Hopkins, Dave Jacobs, they were everywhere talking about their research. And Hopkins was trying to keep a lid on some of the scarier aspects of this. But Jacobs was going full bore. This is dangerous. It's horrible. It's terrible. Something is coming, okay? So when I laid that on Greer, Greer said, no, wait a minute. I'm an emergency room doctor, which he was, all right? An MD. And he loved to pull that card out, by the way. And he said, you know, there have been times when I've had emergencies come into my hospital, and I had to go in and I had to do things that hurt the people, but it was for their benefit, okay? And I said, look, I just put to bed an article I wrote, and then I laid it out to him because the info at that time was very fresh in my mind. This incident happened, this incident happened, this incident happened. And the bottom line was we agreed to disagree. That was the bottom line. And Greer left, and we never heard from him again. until a couple of years later. Vicki and I did an issue on various UFO groups then very prevalent in the field. And we titled the issue Cults, C-U-L-T-S, or Cutting Edge, okay? And we had several very sketchy outfits that we zeroed in on. But we mentioned only in passing Stephen Greer's group, C SETI. Said nothing negative about it, although I could have. But about a week, 2 weeks later, Greer's West Coast coordinator for C SETI, another doctor by the name of Joe Burks, and later they had some kind of falling out. I never found out why, but they had a falling out, so Burks kind of disappeared. But at the time, he was a loyal soldier. And he sent us at the magazine a 15-page letter castigating UFO Magazine because we mentioned C SETI in this issue. Then he challenged me to a debate on CompuServe, where we would be two keyboard warriors, okay, typing at each other. And I told Vicki, I said, why in the hell would I do that? I got a radio show, okay? I'm going to call Burks up and invite him on the show. We can do a debate right there. Well, we did. Now, if you were in the area at that time, and my studios were at CRN, Cable Radio Network, we would take our guests, if they were in-house, out to dinner. Buy them dinner, get to know them, chat, that kind of thing. And Burks was, he was totally cool with that. Another nice guy, very friendly. But right before all of that happened, a woman in the C SETI organization started spreading some online attacks directed at me and Vicki. All right. By the way, one of the attacks involved the fact that Vicki's uncle, Grant Cooper, was Sirhan's criminal defense attorney. And that could only mean that she was connected to the CIA. Okay? And I had done a couple of in-depth and, quite frankly, some knife throat cutting exposés on this major lunatic by the name of Bill Cooper. All right. Now that's a name you can look up. In November of 2001, he died in a shootout with police officers down in Arizona after he shot one officer in the head, a Desert Storm veteran, okay, with 3 kids. The guy survived. I don't know what his status is today, but this guy was, I'm telling you, he was a lunatic. And she used that on me, claiming that I was CIA. Okay.
Wow, I was getting ready to say the degree of separation was 1 degree from Don from the CIA. Now he's in the CIA.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Talk about
so anyway,
talk about cracking some eggs.
So anyway, we get Burks into the studio, and my show was 2 hours long, and I did not let up. And at the end of those 2 hours,
how could that have possibly happened? And why we are catching our breath, Don, I'd just like to let you know that we have a couple minutes to the break, and I hope people will drop us some notes in the chat, as well as if they want to shoot me an email. I'll check on the break. Go ahead, sir. Now that you caught your breath.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So anyway, at the end of those 2 hours, Burks jumped up from his studio chair and literally ran out of the building. Okay. Didn't even say thanks for dinner. So that was the end of that. So needless to say, I've never been on close elbow buddy with Steve Greer. We'd never gone out and had a beer or anything else. So there it is.
Any other contact with him?
With him?
Yeah.
No.
Or his organization? No.
Oh, well, we rubbed elbows here and there with CSETI, but no, they regarded us as totally compromised because we're CIA. Okay, that was the thing. And of course, you know that at one point, Greer put out a letter basically saying that he knew more about the UFO subject than the President of the United States. And as a matter of fact, he referenced, this is what he claimed, a dinner with the head of CIA back in those days. Now, the actual truth of the matter was he ran into this guy in a restaurant. The guy was there with his wife and another party. And Greer walked up, introduced himself. They said, "Oh, how do you do? Yes, nice to meet you, et cetera, et cetera." And then Greer left. Well, according to Greer, he was briefed by this guy. Now, I could be wrong. I think it was James Woolsey.
Yeah.
That name, for some reason, pops up in my mind. But Woolsey said, in essence, that's total bullshit. Okay. So.
But he's in the CIA. He's the head of it. You know he's not going to tell the truth.
No.
They could have done a mind meld. They could have done a mind meld right there at the table. He could have transferred it from implant.
It's like
to
that
implant.
nothing burger.
Yeah.
Yeah, you my melt that cheese right on the nothing burger.
And why?
You know, sometimes it's hard knowing where all the bodies are buried. Oh, jeez. But anyway,
you know, go ahead, Cobra. You're about.
No,
to
I'm just going to say we're right up against the break. I just think it's fantastic that we're having all these kind of. Again, I'm jealous that I have not had the experience. You know, the couple things that I have seen, with the exception of one, and I didn't have an emotional connection to it. I was interested in what I saw. I wouldn't mind that, but I guess you just have to be part of a special club. And like Groucho Marx said, I wouldn't be a part of any club that would have me. And with that, I think it's time for us to go to a break and pick it up on the other side, gentlemen.
Okay.
Well, in that case, since I'm lead flight, we'll be back after these few words. Stick around. And we are back as promised. And what happened to Padre?
Hi.
I don't know.
Oh, there he is. There he is. Okay.
I thought the
Padre,
spray
yes.
got him. I thought it was one of those black bag jobs, you know.
No, I was had to take a call from Greer.
guys are getting your
What-
dinner reservations
what is your-
all set up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
I'll
is
take them to
your
McDonald's.
overall?
So, what do you guys think about this whole? What is it? Scion. What did they call those?
Did I lose my audio?
Nope, you're back. You're here.
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Now to get back to my original statement, Commander Cobra, what is your overall impression of this video? Are you totally discounting it? Because I want to get that on the record.
I think you're asking me, am I discounting it as an extraterrestrial vehicle recovery?
How about a recovery per se of anything?
I think there's a high probability you're looking at something. I just don't see it as a high probability that it's extraterrestrial. Just looking at that very short amount of time, I don't think it's faked. It could be a CGI kind of representation. I don't think so. I think it is a fairly standard video recording of a sling event. I think it's probably done from the hoist position, not a cargo hook position in the belly of the aircraft, as I was describing earlier, only because of the way of the angle of the view of the picture is being done. And that would tell me that the weight would be fairly light. What that is at the end of it, the egg, does not weigh a great deal. And I think it's a fairly high hover. And I think we are looking at something. I just don't think it is something not of this earth. I think it is something from this earth.
Okay, very good. Now, with that being said, did you get the impression this would be considered sensitive, secret, top secret?
I don't have a good feel for that, Don. And the reason I say that, and I'm being a little bit cagey on it, is that very sensitive video clips show up all the time because of the world we live in with the kinds of recordings that are going on. If you guys remember when we had a flurry of activity in the Navy right after the first big disclosure from the Nimitz carrier group, there was all kinds of things seen. And I remember telling Martin, in fact, asked me, and I told Martin, that is not a extraterrestrial. And I was at a conference where it was shown because the backseater in the F-18, the Rio was able to get a rapid moving the camera because what he could see, he spun the camera over the sensor head over. He was able to pick it up, and it was one of those flying over the water clips that were going on. But I couldn't say anything beyond that. Now it's out that it was part of an exercise and they were doing defense of it. And if you look where things have gone in places like Ukraine, the Houthis in the Red Sea, we knew this was coming. We knew that this explosion in drones was going to be an issue. And if you look at the events that happened in November all the way till now, and I'm telling you, I'm waiting for President Trump to come up with one of his last campaign promises that this week sometime he's supposed to tell us what he knows, what he's heard about what was going on in New Jersey. I'm almost as excited about that as I am the what's going on with the file release on the assassinations, because I think that's why we did the inauguration inside the Capitol Dome. Now I know.
Well, this entire thing, one thing kept running through my mind when I was watching this. If, as was stated, this was a disclosure of a top secret recovery operation, okay, then I knew that if this guy had been the pilot or a pilot there, that he would have probably had to, among other things, sign a non-disclosure agreement. And here he was, in essence, on national television, revealing this purportedly top secret operation. No blowback, nobody coming after this guy, nobody arresting this guy. Okay, that I gotta say that played through my mind.
Sure, and I think it's a fair observation and comment to make. The timing of it as well. We don't know when this occurred. Again, it's not an interactive presentation. It's extremely short. It's timed very close to the turnover between the presidencies. I think that is at play here. I think that's part of it. I think it's this insatiable desire to either attach yourself to the energy of a new administration coming in, or to be part of the disrailing of it, or some kind of misdirection to other things that were going on into that weekend. So all those things figure in there. I've always questioned, Chris, when we look at these things and people are talking about it, how they get away with it. They're using their name. They're not in the dark room. There isn't the voice changer, and they're still walking around.
Right.
And Padre, you had something you wanted to say.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that to be fair, in that piece, Coulthart did say that they had threats, that their families had been threatened, and they were all armed. And you could see that he had what looked like a private security detail with him in the background. So I think that there has been some blowback. And let's not also discount the service record of this gentleman and also the other special operator that they interviewed, his friend there. They have impressive service records. You know, these guys have been through quite a few military adventures that certainly they deserve our admiration for their service to our country. Now, what's happened to them, I never heard. Did you guys hear? Is he still active duty, or is he retired, or what's his status?
That's a good question.
No, I think he's medically retired, isn't he, Chris?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, because you have a great love, affection for an object, I don't think that's going to medically retire you. I don't think there was anything that he said would medically retire him. But you know what? I did, during the break, load the video. If you all guys want, let me play the video of this, and then we'll get some comments.
Sure.
NewsNation has independently obtained previously unseen video obtained from a secret UAP craft retrieval program. This extraordinary footage clearly shows an egg-shaped object dangling in a sling below the belly of a helicopter.
Let's slow this down to take a closer look. That's an egg-shaped UAP suspended from a 150-foot long line. We're told the craft is about 20 feet long. The egg suspended in a cradle. And look how careful the pilot is as they bring their...
Commander, what do you think?
I think there's something there. I think it has a certain amount of mass to it. I don't think it's that heavy. 150 foot is a high, that's a very high hover. So it's either very light, or if it has, some extraordinary weight to it, that you're going to have it need that height. You'll need a lot of power in the aircraft. As I said, the sound doesn't seem right to me, but it could be the way that was recorded. It could have been added in for effect. If you didn't have it, it's unusual that you would record sound. Usually in those kinds of internal aircraft videos, you're hearing the interplay of what the crew member in the back, usually a flight mechanic or a flight engineer, the aircrew that's directing the hoist, or the sling load movement, to the pilots, because your pilot generally is not looking down, especially at night. They're usually fixing their eyesight on some point so that they can maintain balance, and you're looking at your instruments inside the cockpit. So again, I think there's something there. I'm not seeing anything that really gives me the indications. It doesn't. The outside shell or the outside surface, probably a better word to use, doesn't seem to have any markings on it. What could it be? Don't know. I've seen radar enclosures, things that you put ground and ship-based type radars that look like those kinds of structures, but they're not egg-shaped completely. They usually have some kind of area cut away from it where it attaches to something, but it had that kind of look to me.
What do you think, Don?
The woo-woo music kind of threw me off.
Yeah, that's a poor choice. They don't have Bill Skywatcher producing their film there, because Bill would have got an AI song that he would have created and put that to it.
I think, as we previously said in the beginning of the show, I think this thing is maybe a balloon. Some people had commented, said it might be a drone of some sort, but I don't think it's extraterrestrial. And if it was, I mean, why would they just not cover it? They're not even putting a canopy or, tying something where you can't see what it is, if it's that secret of a project. Does that make sense, Commander?
Well, again, Chris, what I've said to you before that I find the most off on this is that what we're looking at doesn't make sense unless it goes back to the example I gave where you had some kind of a problem and you're setting it back down for some reason. because there's nobody on the ground. This is precious cargo, right? There's nobody on the ground supervising that, getting it lifted up. And now if this is where it's being delivered, it's an unusual spot. When you usually deliver something like that, there's nobody on the ground, like a fuel bladder, or it's, it's dead cargo. It's not anything that if it hits the ground hard, it's going to cause any problem, or it's so dangerous that you don't want anybody near it when you're doing this. I can see that. I just don't get that feel from this very short part of it.
Well, now on the show, as you know, they did bring Gary Nolan on there. And Nolan did, in fact, talk about personnel that got very close to a UFO UAP suffering damage. Now, I could be all wet, but I got the impression that the subject of this video, the pilot, in fact, they were suggesting he suffered ill effects from this encounter. Now, if that's true, okay, that might suggest another reason why there was no ground crew there, that it was sending out harmful radiation of some type.
Sure.
Could that be it?
Absolutely. But who wrapped it up in that sling? Okay. I mean, I understand that, Don.
Some PFC or E4.
Well, but generally, you put somebody in a proximity suit of some kind. There are shielding things to go on. That's the all more. And if it was putting out radiation, and it's that severe that the pilot was feeling it, it's interesting that I don't see anything coming on to the camera, because what those signals that are coming in, the conversion of enhanced light in this low light situation that's going on, or if it goes into the infrared spectrum, is electronically converted as it's being recorded and saved. That's how that data goes. So if you have, unless it's heavily shielded, on the aircraft, I would expect to see some kind of static. That's the reason why, again, the soundtrack is very unusual to me, because I don't understand why you have rotor sound caught on this. It doesn't appear to be somebody's helmet or hand-loaded handheld type camera that's looking at this. It appears to be a very stable position. That's why I think it's attached to the aircraft in some way, the helicopter in this case.
I mean, maybe I don't know a lot about UFO retrieval because I've never been involved in it. But if you were going to put it down somewhere, wouldn't you put it on a flatbed of a truck?
Sure.
I mean, you're just going to lift it back up again, right? You're not going to roll it
or some kind of padding. Again, the only explanation I can give you is that you have this little section of a clip is because they had to set it down to either reset it or they had some other problem. The thing I don't realize, I'm not sure about that, is because generally if you have a problem, and again, this is very precious, right? And you have a 150-foot cable. I didn't see anything at the end of the sling cable that looked like a low release for the attachment to that is on that sling cradle around the egg attaching to that cable. So generally what that means is if you had to get rid of this, like I was describing before, when you had to get rid of the F-111 capsule, it's going to come off the airplane up here on its belly or off that hoist, and that's where it's going to attach. That means that 150 feet of sling could land on top of it. Probably something, So usually when you do that, you set something down, then you will immediately go very quickly off to one side, and that's when you release it. So most of it would fall away. I don't see any of that happening. Could happen in the next frame. They see the motion go through. It's a kind of a frustrating tease of what you're looking at there. And I obviously would never comment on someone's service without knowing them, but I will question sometimes what is being said that I'm trying to understand. Okay, you're throwing this out here. You're not giving me a lot to accept and understand. And we live in an age of a lot of fake information.
Sure.
Purposeful deception is part of the game, the psyop, all that kind of stuff. And again, I don't see, and I like News Nation, don't get me wrong, but I'm not seeing a lot of intense journalistic pursuit here to help me understand what it is that I'm supposed to be understanding. And I often have said this, I deprive my village here in Maine of its idiot when I'm away. So maybe you have to explain to me a little bit more slowly. You're just getting that now, aren't you, Chris? That whole village idiot.
No, I got it right there. I just didn't want to laugh out loud. That's it. I was being respectful to you.
Oh.
I mean, I thought it was a good joke, but, you know, I didn't want to make an ass of myself.
Now you have 1 degree separation from the village idiot up here in Maine, in the village outlet. See,
listen, I'm up
You all
here in
do.
Buffalo, and in the wintertime, there's a lot of village idiots running around up here.
we only have 1 here in my
I
town.
got a few of them running around gym swords at minus 7 degrees weather. Go Bills!
Commander, I'd like to ask you some just operational type questions here concerning this type of an operation, if I may. This supposedly took place at a place called The Range.
Right.
Have you ever heard that?
Yeah, that's a pretty open term. What it should be indicating is what they sometimes refer to as the box out at Nellis. That's the restricted zone where Groom Lake is and where a lot of the testing goes on. And, there's a lot of very ultra sensitive development activity. And it's always been rumored that there's, recovered aircraft, recovered ET craft there. We've done a lot. That's where the U-2 was tested. That's where the SR-71 was developed. The Range I've heard of an area near Tonopah that matches that description. That term has been used, but that is a very lax term. I've also heard the Range referred to in an area up in the Dugway Proving Grounds, which is considered kind of like the 2nd or 3rd Area 51 activity because of chemical, biological weapon and range testing that goes on there. And it's a huge expanse. There was at one time very strong evidence that we were flying in the secret space program, not the one where we have vehicles from ETs that we are borrowed, recovered, reflying, or on an exchange program with. And I've had people explain to me that's what they were involved in. No way that I could prove it. But I am convinced that we have had other vehicles that the military was using extraterrestrially or extra Earth, out of Earth orbit, out of the atmosphere, that look very much like things like the Dream Chaser and some of the other stuff that's coming out commercially now. And Dugway in that area was one of the places they said, well, this is a good place to do those launches because it's generally, not an extended orbital period that they're working with. And it has a huge amount of area. And we don't have people sitting up in lawn chairs that are surrounding the hillsides and other areas constantly looking in. So that Range, that term has been used for many sensitive test areas that has gone on.
He mentioned in his report that, well, let's take this. There's an object on the ground. How did it get on the ground? Is it crashed? Was it landed? Whatever. Anyway, you're part of a retrieval team, and you're assigned to go get this thing. Now, in order for them to go get it, there would usually be an advanced ground team there at the object, wouldn't there be? Wouldn't there have to be?
In general, I mean, let me give you a real case situation. Never recovered an egg, but I was asked to be prepared to recover a then Soviet aircraft that had crashed. We were very interested in getting it.
Okay.
So the first thing we had to do, because it wasn't in the country that I was stationed in at the time, we had to figure out, okay, did we have the aircraft? Then we had to meet with the people that were going to be there. And what we found out was, well, some of them are already en route to the area. And what they were going to do is they were going to prepare it for us. And preparing it for us in this particular case meant, without improperly stating it, it was another helicopter. And their idea was to prepare it, was to get rotor blades off of it so that it was didn't have it would be a much more manageable payload. We wanted to get the fuselage, which mainly was intact. And they were going to put on the physical attachments. And someone had to study the physical attachments. They had to know where to put it so that when we lifted it up, it didn't start to break apart, because that can turn into a real cataclysmic situation. Generally, you're going to do these things at night because night grants you a certain amount of security, anonymity, especially in the time period I'm talking about, the 80s. And you're going to take it to a location very quickly where you're generally going to be met with a large airlift type aircraft where they can very quickly push it into that aircraft and get it out of that spot. Because generally you're either tacitly working with the country that it's at, And if you think about like an adversary type aircraft that you're trying to recover, you are probably paying somebody off to get access, not having people look at their radar at the airspace when you sneak in and sneak out to do this. And the ranges that are involved, generally in helicopters, are relatively short. You don't get a lot. And when you're in these type of activities, you're burning much more fuel than you do when you're cruise flying. That brings your range down even less. So all those things have to happen. So you either insert a team with another helicopter. It takes a certain amount of time to prepare it. And sometimes it can be very drilled. I mean, there was very well-schooled people that were designed to collect the payloads that were being dropped from satellites in the 70s and 80s, because we did not have the type of electronic download that we have now with satellites. They physically had cameras, and when the camera took the pictures on their passes where we were interested in looking, they would set it up, they would drop it, they would have a C-130 that would try to capture, much like Ice Station Zebra, when the little thing is coming down. They had the plane that would try to come by, had what they call cat's whiskers out the front end, and it would try to catch the cable. And they would have a helicopter below it, because they did this mainly over the open ocean in the Pacific. They didn't want to go in the water. So again, very well planned, lots of people involved. You don't see any of this, and that's why I try to give you the explanation what I think we were looking at, if that's the scenario.
When we look at this object in the video, it's perfectly smooth. There's no sign of
what appears to be perfectly smooth.
It appears to be. But so you're in the advanced team, and you're going out there, and you've got these guys at the site. You're the pilot. You're tasked to go get it. This thing, if it's extraterrestrial, I mean, it's like the most precious cargo that the military could ever think to have. They got to be thinking, okay, how do we get this into the sling? We don't know how much it weighs. We don't know what its weight and balance is. I mean, for a helicopter pilot to go and pick something up, the pilot needs to know ahead of time how much it weighs, doesn't he?
Generally, yeah. So let me explore to you the possible explanation.
Okay.
You know what it is. If you know what it is, you are able to rapidly have that sling available, which appears to almost be stuck on the surface because it doesn't flip, doesn't fall away when it's doing that little contact with the ground. It doesn't look like it's falling out of that sling. It looks like it's attached to it. I don't see any ratchet type straps. So what I'm getting at, Padre, is you either have done this before,
mm-hmm.
and it's another one. So you have a procedure. You kind of know what it weighs. You kind of know what you're going to do. You kind of already have the gear set up for it. And do you lay that little sling mat out, and then you roll this thing onto it, and then you just bring it up on top? Because in general, looking at this type of sling, someone had to attach it to the end of the sling.
Yep.
On that spot.
Yep.
That's would have had to happen. There's nothing really automatic about this. And I don't see anything on it. There are some stuff that you can do remote. That's why I was saying that if you're going to get rid of it, it would probably come away from the airplane, not at the bottom. There are slings that have a detachment at the bottom. If you look at logging that they do with helicopters, the sling never leaves the aircraft. The guy or gal comes in, they pick up the logs, they're going to move, they take it off the mountainside, they bring it down, they lay it into a truck, and they're able to detach it, and they fly right back up, and they get the next connection. And there's somebody at that park to connect it to the helicopter sling.
But if you have like 5 or 6 guys on the ground, they've either seen one of these before, like you said, right, or they haven't. And if it's their first time, they come up and they go, "Whoa, what is that?" And then they have to figure out, okay, how, it would have to be in a perfectly flat place, because if it's like on an incline, you don't want to roll it, or it's going to go down the hill and smash into a million pieces. I mean, there's so many logistical questions I have.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And what I'm getting at, you've done this before, or it has been around a while, and now it's time to move it.
Okay.
You put a temporary cargo net or a shelter, like a tent, over this, right? Looks like it would fit in that. And you've studied it, and now you've prepped it all up, and now it's ready, and you take away all those enclosures. You wait for the night, you come in, it's all set to go. It's been evaluated, it's been looked at. You figure out what you can move. You're able to jack it up, maybe get the thing underneath it if it weighs that much. You get it all set up. but we're not seeing any of that. What
Yeah.
we're seeing is a very small portion of the flight, and it looks like they're very gently putting it down. And the best explanation I can give is you're having some kind of an issue. You're either trying to stabilize it because it was moving around too much, and I don't see anything leading up to that, or you have a problem with the helicopter, or you're getting low on fuel maybe because you can't fly very fast, and you're going to put it to this spot, and you're going to come back after you get fuel and continue to move it.
Yeah.
It's not, to me, this looks like an interrupted part of a movement. To be putting it down in the area that's kind of portrayed underneath it, because it doesn't make any sense. Unless they could have people that are off the camera that are waiting for it to be safe and move in. I can't tell you, but I found that unusual.
Coulthart says he's going to release the full 2 hours of the video here in coming days. And if that's the case, maybe for next week's show, we'll have a better idea of what we're dealing with.
Maybe at that point, we will be able to look at it and say, yeah, again, nothing I'm seeing there, unless it's like the internal, maybe this is like an internal payload in something,
Yeah.
I think everyone, when they looked at this, either sees that this is like, I'll go as far as to say the anti-gravity device. This is the kind of a tic-tac egg-shaped thing, and it flew, and it can do all those things. If that's the case, I'm really interested because it appears to be fairly light. So that's very, very interesting. Or is this the internal payload to something? Was this inside another craft of some kind that they pried open, and this is the prize cargo that they want to take out? Is this like the internal capsule inside in that?
So this could be ours then, right?
Or somebody else on the planets.
Because you convinced me before that the Tic Tacs were ours.
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind about that. And when I say ours, I mean like U.S. ours.
Right. And so that tells me that, this could have been a faulty test flight or something of that nature where, they said, okay, we got to go get this thing, because there's the whole video just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. But I'm no pilot. I'm certainly not a helicopter guy. So, I'd be one of those guys on the ground, I could tell you, but not up in the air. To me, but it just doesn't make sense.
Well, guys,
would you mind if I made a detour for a moment?
Okay.
Yeah.
Because this is something that I've been basically chomping at the bit to get to Commander Cobra about.
Uh-oh.
I think there's not much argument to be made that the last 4 years, the security of this nation has been put at great and grave risk, okay? With the porous southern border, the number of people that came in here, the number of potential combatants, the tons of illegal drugs like fentanyl that have literally killed thousands upon thousands of people that have partook of this drug. And just a few days ago, a certain admiral, head of the Coast Guard by the name of Linda Fagan, was fired by the Trump administration for basically, among other things, dereliction of duty, preponderance of interest in things like DEI, failing to interdict on the high seas, drug runners, drug dealers, etc., and she was let go. Now, Commander Cobra, as we all know, at one point was in the Coast Guard, and I'm sure he's been keeping up on current events. Commander Cobra, do you have any remarks or anything you'd like to make about this?
I'm gonna, for proper disclosure, I actually know Linda Fagan. I flew with her husband. I thought and still think she is a very decent person. I don't know the details because I am not actively involved. I think the state of the Coast Guard, as well as other military branches, regardless of what people will contribute to the reasons why that is in a very depleted situation. I have, as has been well documented, and the reason that I retired as a commander and was lucky to get that far in rank is that I have a great deal of problem with a lot of the leadership decisions that have been made leading up to this. So in the case of Admiral Fagan, I am sorry to see this is how it went. I don't have the details. Some of the things that were said, I would agree with, especially in the lack of progress that she was able to lead changes in, specifically in the procurement of now what has become a critical ship capability, which is solely rests with the United States Coast Guard, which is icebreakers, which I spent a great deal of my career on. And we are woefully behind in getting those ships launched. And now we have the Chinese, which do not have a border in the Arctic region, extensively actively operating in the Arctic region with our friends from Russia, which does have a huge dominance in the Arctic. So we have that situation. And we are in a very difficult situation with our helicopter fleet in the Coast Guard because it's been lengthily behind. The Coast Guard has made great strides in the project called Deepwater to bring the cutters, which are various sizes of ships, to a great length. So I have to be straight up that I don't know the details behind Admiral Fagan's being fired. I'm sad to see it happen. From the outside looking in, I think that there has been way too much attention on focusing on diversity as a means of being the key element, where both of you, as fellow veterans, I always found that the binding of our diverse backgrounds was the most important thing that you did in the military. That was something that was preached to you two gentlemen from your very first days in basic training, that it made no difference what your background was. You put on this uniform, you are now part of this unit, you are part of this service, and you all bleed red. So anything that's not focused on that, anything that's not focused on the mission, and that includes the Coast Guard, although it's not something the Coast Guard generally identifies with in these more modern times, is to close with the enemy and succeed, defeat the enemy. So in my case, the enemy often was weather. The enemy was running out of time to get people off a ship or somebody that was in peril in the sea. And to do that, you had to be at the top of your game all the time. And when I left, I started to see a departure from that more and more, where we were more concerned with other activities. And you gentlemen know that I still work as a contractor in the military, and I don't agree with a lot of the ways that we go forward. But I still believe in our services, and I think that is just the difference in opinion. And I think the pendulum might be swinging back, that we're realizing that maybe a more fundamental approach has to go. And what a number of my Coast Guard friends, most all of them are retired, wondered, how much notice Commandant Fagan had before this happened. I'm sorry to see it happen, but these things do happen. And I'm going to go into a spot. This is not a direct one-for-one comparison, but I think it has changed greatly with President Trump. And in this, what I mean by it, the worst debacle I have seen in my military and post-military career was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. I don't go much more than a day that I don't think about the 13 names of the service members that we lost there.
Shouldn't have lost.
The following day that I watched, as it was reported on a drone strike, that they took out insurgents. It turned out to be a man with 7 or 8 children delivering water to the airport. And no one lost their job. No one resigned. No one was fired. And to me, that far outweighs anything that Admiral Fagan could have possibly done in the time period. And I think it's just a reflection of what we have evolved to and the rapid change we're going to have to make if we plan on keeping this country safe from a military standpoint. I could go on for hours about watching our Navy dwindle down to the types of ships. We don't have cruisers right now, and we're putting destroyers into positions that cruisers used to operate in and changing out weapon systems that are not really well suited to carry because we do not have the ships that we need in the Navy. The Air Force average age on fighter tactical aircraft is plus 20 years. The F-22, the best airplane we have for air supremacy, is 25 years old. Okay, so this may be the first indication of changing the tone. And it may have been the most convenient one because of the proximity to our homeland defense, homeland security, and the preponderance of not paying attention to the mission. But I have a lot of mixed emotion on this, and I feel bad for the situation as it went, but I don't have the details down to give you much more than an outsider looking back. But this is not a trend that I am surprised that we're finally at the point of breaking some bowls, because it has continued. Eisenhower was correct. President Eisenhower correctly pointed out that if we did not get a handle of this, we were going to have nonstop degradation. It's wonderful that we're building all these weapons, but we're paying more for it. We're not training our airmen, our soldiers, our Marines, our sailors. It's not the mission first, and then leaders taking care of their people to execute that mission. We're off target on that. And I think that's partially what this is an outgrowth of.
Well, thank you for that very well thought out soliloquy, Cobra, because I could not agree with you more. It would be impossible.
Can I jump on that a little bit, Don?
You bet.
Oh, I just like to say that I don't know anything about Admiral Fagan, and she might be a very nice person.
I think she is.
That's it. But that being said, she's the commandant of the Coast Guard, and you have to project to your people a strong leadership position. You could be the one of the best officers there are, but if you cannot project a strong leadership position, you're going to make the men and women of the Coast Guard wonder what the hell's going on. And there's been bad commandants of the Marine Corps. There's been bad generals of the Army. There's been bad, generals of the Air Force. And we starting to see certain generals and stuff, rather than picking strong leaders, we pick political yes men. And I don't know Admiral Fagan was a yes man or not, but what I've read, what I've seen, her projection of leadership was diminished. Whether she was just taking orders from the top, because let's face it, the top commander-in-chief, his ability to lead was diminished. And I'm being very polite when I say that, because there's a lot of other words that would describe that. But that's the problem with the military, is that your officers, your leaders, your non-coms have diminished in their roles. They're like the Marine Corps. And I say this in total respect. We were a broadsword. We're not a scalpel. The Marine Corps should, and we kind of go, well, let's just kind of take a bite out of these people and maybe we'll leave it alone. That's not the way I was taught in the Marine Corps. I was a broadsword. I went in and destroyed everything. Okay? If you were the enemy, I destroyed you. That was what I was taught. Now we don't teach that. We don't teach a warrior spirit anymore. We teach a diversity spirit. And when you get these guys who are, getting ready to go battle, and you say, well, let's talk about equality. There's not, and I know I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but In war, there's no equality. You
Well,
don't stay over there.
I think Chris, I'm going to correct you because I want to be very careful with this, what you're talking about. I think the word you're looking at is equity, not equality. Because the
Equity,
United
I'm
States
sorry.
military is equality.
Well,
It's a
you're right.
merit-based system.
I'm looking for equity, and I apologize for that.
I think
apologize for
everyone
listeners.
that wore the uniform or is wearing it now remembers being told, until probably just recently, your color, your background means nothing. The person
absolutely
next to you, the person in front of you, and the person behind you is all that matters. Because
I
those are the
misspoken
people-
on that, and I thank you for correcting me because equity I was looking for is tough.
Equity means we're going to have an equal outcome, and that's just
Right.
not how this is going to work.
Right, and that's why I think you see such a dramatic change going to be coming to the military, because we've lost that warrior spirit, the equality of every man in that foxhole, man and woman, to know I got your back. You got my back, and I got your back.
Well, it
And
all
I think
began
that has to start from the top.
began to go to hell at the very end of the Vietnam War, my war. Okay. By the time I was wounded, which was in the spring of 1972, and I spent close to 6 months in military hospitals. When I got home and I discharged, I got my honorable discharge. I got home and nobody was there to meet me except my mother and my father and my grandmother. Okay. Now they had done a big thing in the newspaper after I was wounded, and I must have got a couple of hundred cards in the military hospital. I went from Da Nang, from the 95th Evac, to the Naval Hospital in Guam, and then to Camp Cooey, the Camp Cooey Hospital in Okinawa. And I stretched that for as long as I could, Okinawa. But when I got home, okay, nobody cared. Nobody gave a damn. And as a matter of fact, one guy did care enough to spit on me. All right. This is a guy I knew from my high school football team. And I reacted poorly when he did that, but so be it. But the bottom line was, from that point forward, if you look, and I did a study of this, I looked at the television programs and stuff, how veterans, military veterans, primarily Vietnam veterans, were portrayed almost universally as drug addicts,
You were
baby
damaged.
killers.
You were damaged. You were not suitable to be back in the public.
in
You were
polite
always
society.
portrayed as a damaged element.
And it was not until, and I love this man to this day, Tom Selleck's portrayal of Magnum, PI. It was his show, and it was, oh my God, if you weren't around in the early 80s when that thing was being broadcast, almost universally across the board, primarily Vietnam veterans, loved Selleck and his buddies TC and Rick. Okay, they were all purportedly Vietnam vets. Now Selleck actually was a veteran of the National Guard.
Correct.
Okay, he never served in combat, but you would have never known that by watching this show. But that's when it slowly began to turn a little bit, and then in '84 with the Vietnam War Memorial, and then another thing jumped out of the shadows. And my God, I can remember seeing this, and I just would shake my head. All the phony veterans that jumped forward. Okay. Oh, I was a Navy SEAL in Vietnam. Oh, I was a Green Beret in Vietnam. Oh, no, I did this and I did that. You know, and 99% of the time, these guys were full of it. All right. They were never closer to the military than the last time they watched a John Wayne movie. But you could see the erosion. For me, the erosion of the military from that point forward. We stopped learning how to win, okay? We didn't win. Well, maybe we won kind of in Reagan, when Reagan went into what the hell was that island? To kick
Grenada.
the
Grenada.
Cubans out? Yeah, Grenada. And maybe we won when we drove Saddam out of Kuwait, kinda, okay, but we didn't finish it there. That was left for years later. But we stopped winning. We weren't allowed to win. All right. The military became a nation building enterprise. And I was very vocal about it myself. It was, quite frankly, the military is here to do two things. Okay. You know what those two things are? Kill the enemy and break up all their shit. That's it. Okay, that's it.
So,
And,
Don,
we lost that. We lost it.
We went from a draft service to an all-volunteer service. The emphasis became that we did not want to engage in large army competition. We closed out the Cold War, and we closed out the Cold War because of investment in technology, and we bankrupted the then Soviet Union that could not compete. They attempted to, and they could not.
What did Teddy Kennedy say? Immediately following that, Teddy Kennedy, what did he say? I want my peace dividend. Where is my peace dividend? You remember that?
I do. So the problem with the peace dividend is that to keep our economy rolling, we still had to have a large military industrial complex that fed into this. So the emphasis becomes on you're going to have less soldiers, people that are in the infantry, people that are in the foot marching portion of it, and we're going to surpass greater numbers of enemy airplanes, enemy ships with technology and superior capability. And we carried that along for quite a while. Desert Storm was a dramatically great demonstration. It was the final nail in the coffin of the then Soviet Union. But we also had 6 months to prepare for that. And that was my first real major test of the big op for me, my generation. Oh, we had minor, interesting spy versus spy playbook kind of stuff during the end of the Cold War leading up to that. But that was the big one. But we didn't take a lot of the right lessons. And again, there's external forces driving some of this. We have stepped away from it. But you both have hit upon two major key issues. We put an emphasis on management, not leadership, because it's easier to manage. It's very difficult to lead. And the other part is, in polite company, no one wants to, I will phrase it probably in a slightly more polite way. Your job in the military is to close with the enemy and defeat it. And that can be a fire in California on a hillside, or it can be dealing with someone from the People's Republic of China in one of their arms going forward that you have to defeat. It's that simple. We're off that. We're not quite focused on that. And we've had a lot of other social engineering kind of pressures that have been put. One of the things I find very distasteful, and I only speak briefly on this, is that the military was the place that I think we made the greatest successes in civil rights ever, was our United States military, because we had rock discipline, and you don't have to like the person that next to you, but it's sort of like my definition of Christianity. You better love them because your life could depend on them, and theirs on yours.
Yep.
And that is what I think broke a lot of the social bullshit that prevailed in this country. I think the military did that. And now to see that get latched onto other social expressions that are going on, because I don't want to be unkind to any people on there, is not always compatible with the role of the military. And quite honestly, if you can't deploy, if you can't go to a foreign land or get on a ship or at a moment's notice go, you have to be in very small numbers. Every person has to know that. And we are just making accommodations across that's not contributing to that mission. And then you see that extends out into other areas. And this show's not about that. So I want to get back to the point of trying to answer up. We may see the pendulum swinging back towards the direction of, as in the words of Bill Murray in the movie Stripes, lean, mean fighting machines. And that's maybe what we need to go back to. And I'll try to use that as the humorous part of it. I do completely agree with you that Magnum PI was really one of the more important shows that broke it, because they talked about it. There were some pretty intense subjects that they tackled there in a somewhat humorous and somewhat a very entertaining format. But there were some very, very sensitive changes that they put, because everybody from Vietnam was a broken returnee, that they were responsible for everything. If they weren't into drugs, they had some other psychological issue. They were always the bad guy in everything that you saw that was going wrong, because that was an easy one to get on, and it was an unpopular war. I don't want any war to be popular. It should be the last resort. But I could go on for hours with you about the White House calling targets. It started in Korea, as far as I'm concerned. We didn't close out what we needed to do there, and that started the trend right then and there.
Well, in a way, I have mixed feelings about the Korean thing, because Douglas MacArthur wanted to nuke the Chinese.
Check your time.
Yes. The time is 1 minute.
Not enough
1
time
minute,
for the
right?
Korean War, Don.
Yeah, well, hell. Bill's not doing anything anyway, is he?
We didn't even touch on the whole psionics thing of this episode that we watched. That whole
and unfortunately,
mentally taking
Padre,
over.
we're out of time. It's 54, right? 54?
57.
57.
Oh,
when the little bird comes out in 3 minutes.
I have my big clock open.
Have the Padre do the psionics thing.
Yeah,
do it, Padre.
I've wanted to just bring this up because it was part of that program on News Nation, that the U.S. government has a program where gifted mental powered people are able to summon and then take over alien craft. How do you sign up for something like that? I mean, is that for real? You guys heard of psionics before?
Well, I think it's an outgrowth of many programs that have been rumored. I don't want to speak for Don because he's connected to the CIA. He probably has better information than I do. That was established earlier, but distant viewing folks that could talk about, they were using remote viewers to say where enemy installations were. Specifically, the story is they were used to figure out where Russian subs were. And when they would draw the picture, many of them drew a disc over the submarine, and they gave some of the digits out to where it was in the ocean. And they talked about UFO activity. So all this is kind of connected with that. I'm a believer in remote viewing. I had a gal on my show. I was absolutely amazed because she knew nothing about me. She didn't even know my real name. And she was able to give it an interesting description. And I've talked to people in the Army program, and it seems to be like some of the intuitive skills that we have, you can develop some of it. And some people are more gifted at it than others. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's impossible for somebody to come up with it based on that fact that we're, connecting with alien beings, taking control of the aircraft. I know for years we've been trying to develop, better mental connection for pilots and aircraft, especially in high stress situations where you can't easily move, but your brain can still activate some of the systems. Clint Eastwood did a very interesting movie about it called Firefox, based on Craig's novel on that, where they had perfected that system. That was based on actually IVs supplied into pilots, delivering different kinds of drugs to help them during a mission. And then you can imagine how that experiment could go wrong. And it did, apparently, for some that were involved in it. My point is, I don't have proof that it didn't happen, but those kinds of claims have some basis in actual things that were attempted, have been done, programs that were run.
Well, I knew Ingo Swann very well, the man that developed the protocols for the remote viewing program, Stargate. And you guys ought to ask me about him sometime. Hey, that's it. We are now officially out of time. That's been it for us here at UAP Crossfire. Gentlemen, Padre, Commander Cobra, Chris, thank you so much. Fantastic show. And good Lord willing, and the river don't rise next week.
I wish
on
I could
UAP
do that,
Crossfire.
Yeah.
This is how
Robert Hastings and the nuclear component to UFO UAPs. See you then. Good night.